Jack. You can offload here. Alfred, take over, will you? Right, man.
They had no power tools, no concrete, no steel, just mud, sticks, and stones. So why are their 800-year-old houses still standing while ours need constant repairs? Medieval builders weren't just smart. They were practical geniuses who turned local dirt, rocks, and trees into homes that outlasted empires. While we ship materials thousands of miles today, these craftsmen looked right outside their doors and found everything they needed. Stone became the backbone of their construction. Not just any stone, but the specific rocks sleeping beneath their feet. Limestone in one valley, granite in another, sandstone where the old rivers carved deep channels. Each region developed its own signature look simply because builders used whatever the earth offered up. Smart? Absolutely. Cheap? You bet. But here's the thing about medieval stone walls. They weren't just strong, they were fireproof fortresses. When wooden cities burned to ash, stone houses stood like stubborn soldiers refusing to fall. 2-foot-thick walls meant your neighbor's kitchen fire stayed his problem, not yours. Then there's timber. Oak ruled the forest, and medieval builders knew it. Dense, heavy, nearly indestructible when properly seasoned. They'd select trees that had weathered decades of storms, knowing that surviving nature meant surviving centuries in a house frame. The wood was so tough that boring insects would literally break their teeth trying to chew through it. Clay and earth finished the puzzle. Mixed with straw, animal hair, even manure, this humble dirt became sophisticated insulation. Walls breathed in summer, held warmth in winter, and cost practically nothing except sweat and time. Local materials meant local knowledge, too. Every village blacksmith knew which stones split clean, which trees seasoned best, which clay held tight. When repairs came, and they always came, the solutions were literally growing in the backyard. Speaking of repairs, the real genius wasn't just in choosing materials, but in how they fit those materials together. Medieval carpenters didn't need Home Depot or a truck full of screws. They built homes that lasted centuries using nothing but wood, wooden pegs, and pure genius. The secret was in the joints. Every beam connected to another through something called mortise and tenon. Basically, one piece of wood had a perfectly carved tongue that slid into a matching slot on another piece. No metal involved, just wood fitting into wood so precisely that you'd need a sledgehammer to pull them apart. But here's the wild part. They held everything together with wooden pegs, usually made from oak. These pegs were driven through the joints like ancient screws, except they never rusted, never broke, and actually got stronger over time as the wood dried and tightened. Why did this work so well? Because wood is flexible. When storms hit, these timber frame houses didn't fight the wind. They danced with it. The whole structure could flex and sway without cracking or collapsing. Try that with modern drywall and see what happens. The beams themselves were massive. We're talking about oak timber so thick that 3 people couldn't wrap their arms around them. These giants supported heavy roofs over rooms wide enough for entire families to gather. And the weird part is, all this precision work was done with hand tools. No power saws, no laser levels, just chisels, mallets, and craftsmen who knew their trade inside out. When something did break, and after a few decades, things do break, repairs were simple. Pop out a few pegs, slide out the damaged timber, slide in a new one. The whole system was basically medieval Lego for grown-ups, but even the strongest timber frame needed protection from the elements. Those beautiful timber frames needed something equally tough to partner with. Medieval stone walls weren't just thick, they were ridiculously thick. We're talking 2 feet of solid rock in some cases. Why? Because medieval builders understood something modern construction often forgets. Mass equals strength. But here's where it gets clever. They didn't just stack rocks like giant Lego blocks. Medieval masons shaped each stone to lock with its neighbors, creating walls that held together even when the mortar cracked. And speaking of mortar, they used lime-based mixtures that had an almost magical property. They could actually heal themselves. When tiny cracks appeared in lime mortar, rainwater would dissolve small amounts of lime and redeposit it in the gaps. The wall literally repaired itself over time. Pretty neat trick for something mixed by hand centuries ago. Then there's the matter of roofs. Wealthy medieval homeowners went for slate. Heavy, expensive, but practically indestructible. Poor folks made do with thatch or clay tiles, but the rich knew slate was worth every penny. Some of those original slate roofs are still keeping the rain out today, 800 years later. The real genius shows in medieval churches and castles. Walk into any old cathedral and you're standing under stone roofing that's been there since before your great-great-great-grandmother was born. These weren't just buildings. They were geological statements. Medieval masons worked with what the earth gave them locally. Limestone regions produced different techniques than granite areas, but the principle remained the same. Build it right once, and it lasts forever. Which brings us to an even more fascinating technique they perfected, one that used nothing but sticks, mud, and centuries of wisdom. While stone and timber grabbed all the glory, medieval builders had a secret weapon hiding in plain sight. Wattle and daub sounds fancy, but it's basically nature's version of chicken wire and plaster. And honestly, it worked better than most modern solutions. Here's how clever these builders really were. They'd take flexible hazel rods, think skinny tree branches, and weave them between upright wooden stakes like a giant basket. This created what they called wattle. Simple enough that a kid could do it, yet strong enough to support an entire wall. But the real genius came next. The daub was their secret sauce, a mixture of clay, chopped straw, and yes, animal manure. Sounds gross? Maybe. But this combo created walls that were surprisingly tough and naturally antibacterial. The straw acted like tiny rebar, holding everything together. The clay provided strength and weather protection. The manure, well, it had binding properties that modern chemistry still respects. What made this system brilliant was its breathability. Unlike modern sealed walls that trap moisture and rot, wattle and daub walls could actually breathe. Air moved through tiny gaps, preventing the buildup of dampness that kills timber frames. No expensive ventilation systems needed. Even better, when something went wrong, any villager could fix it. Damage section? Just mix up some fresh daub and patch it over. No specialists required, no waiting for materials to ship from distant quarries. The repair ingredients were literally growing in their backyard. Some wattle and daub houses lasted centuries with nothing more than occasional patching. Not bad for mud and sticks, right? Speaking of lasting protection, there's another medieval coating that could literally heal itself when it rained. After all that clever wattle and daub work, medieval builders still had one major problem. Raw timber frames looked rough, and worse yet, they were vulnerable to weather, insects, and fire. The solution? Lime plaster became their secret weapon. Here's where things get interesting. Medieval lime wasn't just slapped on walls randomly. Builders created this stuff by burning limestone or chalk in kilns until it turned into quicklime. Then they'd carefully add water, and trust me, this process could get dangerous. The chemical reaction got so hot, it could literally boil water and burn skin. But the payoff was incredible. Once properly mixed and applied, lime plaster created a hard, protective shell over timber frames. The really clever part? This plaster actually got stronger over time. As rainwater hit the surface, the lime would slowly absorb carbon dioxide from the air, essentially turning back into limestone. Self-healing walls, basically. Medieval families weren't satisfied with plain white walls either. They mixed local clay, crushed berries, or even ground up minerals right into their lime plaster. Entire villages would burst with color, red ochre, yellow clay, or deep blue from expensive imported pigments for the wealthy folks. And here's something most people don't know. Lime naturally kills bacteria and resists mold. Medieval homes stayed healthier than many modern houses because of this antimicrobial coating. In coastal areas where limestone was scarce, resourceful builders would gather oyster shells and burn those instead. Same chemistry, different source material. The weird part is how forgiving lime plaster became. Small cracks would literally seal themselves during the next heavy rain, but even the best lime coating meant nothing if water pooled around the foundation. Water was the silent killer of medieval homes. Not fire, not war, not even time itself, just plain old rainwater finding its way where it shouldn't be. Medieval builders knew this. They watched entire neighborhoods crumble because someone got lazy with drainage. So they got creative with gutters, and boy, did they go overboard. Some carved drainage channels directly into massive stone beams. Others built elaborate networks of channels that looked like mini Roman aqueducts running around their roofs. The secret weapon? Roof overhangs that jutted out like baseball caps. These weren't just for show. They created a protective shadow zone around the house. Rain would hit the roof, roll down, and leap clear of the walls entirely. Simple physics, but it worked like magic. Then there's the bold roof designs that seem almost theatrical. Those steep angles and dramatic peaks weren't medieval builders showing off. Well, maybe a little, but mainly they were water-shedding machines. The steeper the roof, the faster water moved and the less time it had to find tiny gaps and seep through. Some builders carved gutters right into stone windowsills, creating perfect little waterfalls that guided every drop away from timber frames. Others built raised stone platforms under doorways, turning potential flood zones into dry walkways. But here's the brutal truth. More medieval houses died from poor drainage than from anything else. A house could survive invasions, harsh winters, and decades of neglect, but let water pool around the foundation for one season too long, and the whole thing would start rotting from the ground up. Speaking of foundations, medieval builders had some seriously clever tricks for keeping their houses high and dry. Medieval roofs weren't just slapped together like modern houses. These builders knew something we've forgotten. A roof had to last longer than the person who built it. That's why they went steep, really steep. The angle wasn't for looks. Steep pitches made water and snow shoot off like they were running from a fire. No sitting around, no seeping through cracks, no rotting the timber underneath. Water hit and ran. Simple physics working overtime. But here's where it gets interesting. Thatch could be over a foot thick. We're talking about grass so dense you could practically walk on it. That massive layer didn't just keep rain out, it was like wrapping your house in the world's best blanket. Hot summers, the thatch kept heat from baking the rooms below. Brutal winters, that same thick layer trapped warm air inside. Then there's slate and tile work that makes today's roofing look amateur. These weren't just pretty coverings, they were engineered systems. Each slate piece locked with the next, creating overlapping shields that could handle decades of punishment. The weird part is how they planned for repairs. Medieval roofers knew their work would need fixing eventually, so they built access points and used materials that could be swapped out piece by piece. No tearing off entire sections. Just replace the damaged bit and move on. A properly built medieval roof could cruise for a century before needing major work. Compare that to modern roofs limping along for 20 years if they're lucky. Speaking of lasting power, medieval roofs were just one part of a bigger puzzle. These houses had another secret that kept them standing through centuries of weather, and it all came down to how they breathed. Medieval houses had a superpower that modern buildings often lack. They could actually breathe. Not literally, of course, but close enough to make all the difference between a home that lasted centuries and one that rotted away in decades. The timber frame construction wasn't just strong, it was flexible. When storms hit or the ground shifted slightly, these houses would flex and sway rather than crack like brittle concrete. The wooden joints could handle movement that would destroy rigid modern structures. It's like the difference between a sturdy tree that bends in the wind versus a telephone pole that snaps. But the real genius was in the walls themselves. Those wattle and daub panels we talked about earlier, they let air pass through slowly, carrying moisture away from the wood before it could cause rot. The lime plaster coating helped too, naturally wicking dampness to the surface where it could evaporate harmlessly. Medieval builders deliberately left small gaps around floor edges, under eaves, between wall sections. These weren't mistakes or the signs of sloppy work. They were calculated ventilation systems that kept air moving through the structure. Fresh air in, stale moisture out. Simple as that. The natural materials worked together like a team. Clay and straw insulation kept winter cold out and summer heat from penetrating too deep. Meanwhile, the breathable walls prevented the trapped moisture that destroys modern buildings from the inside out. Houses built this way could literally shift and settle over decades without falling apart. Some timber frames are still moving slightly after 500 years, adapting to whatever nature throws at them. Makes you wonder why we stopped building this way, doesn't it? Speaking of adaptation, these breathing houses needed something else to survive the centuries. Medieval homeowners didn't just build their houses and forget about them. They treated maintenance like a sacred ritual that happened every single year. Most families would lime wash their entire house annually, creating those brilliant white walls that made villages look so picturesque from a distance. But here's the clever part. Those decorative patterns and colorful designs weren't just for show. They actually hid all the practical repair work underneath. Fresh coatings of lime plaster, patched daub sections, and replaced timber pieces all disappeared under layers of artistic flourishes. Pretty sneaky, right? Fathers taught sons exactly how to spot the early warning signs of trouble. A slight bow in a beam, a crack in the daub, or dampness creeping up from the foundation. These weren't mysteries to medieval families. They knew their houses like doctors know symptoms. Every generation grew up with hands-on knowledge of wood grain, lime consistency, and stone placement. Then there's the social aspect that modern homeowners completely miss. In many villages, major repairs became community events. Neighbors would gather to help rethatch a roof or rebuild a damaged wall section. These weren't just work parties. They were festivals with food, drinks, and storytelling. Everyone pitched in because they knew they'd need help with their own house eventually. The weird part is how much knowledge got passed down through casual conversation. Kids learned by watching, not through formal instruction. They absorbed techniques for mixing daub, selecting timber, and timing repairs just by being around adults who never stopped talking about their houses. This community approach to maintenance created something our modern world struggles with: houses that actually got better with age instead of falling apart. Medieval builders weren't messing around when it came to foundations. They knew something we seem to have forgotten. Water and wood don't mix well, and the ground has moods. Rather than digging deep holes like we do today, they got clever with stone footings. These raised platforms lifted the entire wooden structure off the ground, sometimes by several feet. Smart move. Floods came and went, but the house stayed dry above the chaos. Here's where it gets interesting. They filled their foundation trenches with rubble. Not because they were lazy, but because loose stones actually absorb ground movement better than solid concrete. When frost pushed and pulled at the earth, those foundations could shift slightly without cracking. The whole system worked like a shock absorber made of rocks. Cornerstones were massive. We're talking stones so heavy, it took multiple people to move them into place. These weren't just for show. They anchored the entire frame and distributed weight evenly across the foundation. Without modern machinery, positioning these monsters required serious planning and probably a lot of cursing. The genius part? Air circulation. Medieval foundations left gaps that allowed wind to flow under wooden floors. This constant airflow prevented the timber from rotting, which was basically a death sentence for the whole structure. Modern houses with their sealed-up foundations could learn something here. Then there's the frost line issue. In colder climates, builders dug their foundation trenches below where frost could penetrate and heave the stones upward. They understood that winter ground expansion could literally push a house apart from underneath. But even the smartest foundation work meant nothing without proper drainage systems channeling water away from these stone platforms. Medieval builders basically created the IKEA of their time, but way smarter. Their houses weren't just built. They were engineered to be taken apart and put back together like grown-up Lego blocks. Here's the genius part. Most interior walls weren't holding up the roof. The heavy timber frame did all the hard work, which meant you could knock down walls, move them around, or replace entire sections without the house collapsing on your head. Try doing that with your modern drywall nightmare. When a beam started rotting or cracking, medieval folks didn't call a demolition crew. They'd carefully remove wooden pegs, slide out the damaged timber, and pop in a fresh one. The whole process took maybe a day or two. Compare that to modern renovations that drag on for months and cost more than buying a new house. Then there's the modular magic. Families started small, maybe just 2 rooms, but when kids came along or business got better, they'd simply add another section. The timber frame system made this ridiculously easy because everything connected with standardized joints and measurements. The joinery work was absolutely brilliant. Every connection point was designed so pieces could be swapped out without affecting the rest of the structure. Damaged sections came out clean, and new parts slotted in perfectly. Medieval carpenters basically invented plug-and-play construction centuries before anyone thought of the term. Some houses grew so much over generations they barely resembled their original form. What started as a humble cottage might end up looking like a small mansion after decades of additions and modifications. But here's what's really wild about medieval durability. These builders had tricks that made their houses tougher than anything we build today. Medieval builders weren't just crafting homes, they were creating time capsules. The oak they chose was so dense that insects would literally break their teeth trying to chew through it. We're talking about wood that could outlast empires and often did. But here's where it gets clever. Those thatched roofs weren't just bundles of straw thrown together. Smart builders layered them with ash from their fireplaces or seaweed from nearby shores. The ash made the thatch fireproof, while seaweed naturally repelled bugs and rats. Talk about 2-for-1 protection. Then there's the recycling angle that would make modern environmentalists weep with joy. Medieval builders regularly scavenged wood and stone from Roman ruins, abandoned churches, even older houses that had served their purpose. Your new medieval home might contain timber from a Saxon hall or stones from a Norman watchtower. Hidden history lived in every beam. And the weird part is how lime plaster actually got stronger as decades passed. The stuff absorbed carbon dioxide from the air, slowly turning back into limestone right there on your walls. Your house was literally healing itself while you slept. Most fascinating of all, many houses were designed like medieval IKEA furniture. The timber frame joints could be taken apart, the whole structure dismantled, loaded onto carts, and rebuilt somewhere else entirely. Families moving to new villages sometimes brought their houses with them. These weren't just buildings, they were investments in eternity. The medieval mindset wasn't about quick fixes or planned obsolescence. They built knowing their great-grandchildren would inherit these walls, and their great-grandchildren after that. Medieval builders understood something we've forgotten. True craftsmanship doesn't just survive time, it conquers it.